Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the AltMed podcast. My name is Andrew Dowling. With me, as always, Mitch Kurtz, my co-host. How are you, Mitch?
Pretty well, thank you. Pretty well, actually.
You look well. This is a bit of a special one for us because we've been having all sorts of cannabis dialogues over the journey with people in America, people in Europe, and for some unknown reason, certainly not deliberate reason, we haven't yet had anyone from across the Dutch on our show, but we're going to change that today because we've got two of the leaders of the industry over there. We've got the founder and director with the head grower of Rua in New Zealand. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. And yeah, can you please take a moment to introduce yourselves and talk about how you guys got involved in this space?
Kia ora koutou. My name's Panapa Ehau. I'm one of the founders and directors of Rua Bioscience. And it's been a pretty deep, long journey in the legal cannabis space. There's a whole kind of thing of cannabis years are like dog years. What seems like 1 year, seems like 7 years is only 1 year. Pretty stoked to be on the podcast with you fellas.
Appreciate it. And Porou, how long have you been in cannabis?
Kia ora everybody. My name is Porou Tawhiwhirangi, otherwise known as Porou. I've been with Rua Bioscience as an employee for just over a year and a half, I think, with maybe two. Time flies by, like Panapa says. But I've sort of always been involved in the journey. I was an ex-illicit cannabis grower. Started growing in my late teens in 1994 and learned to become what people call a outdoor guerrilla grower in 1995. So nearly 30 years being involved with the plant. And my journey into Rua Bioscience came when Panapa and a group of others were trying to look at economic projects that could help our area. And I guess our area was plagued for cannabis growing for decades. And their push to where Rua has come now came from trying to utilize our people's skills. So I got sick of living a double life at that time when they started, and decided that I wanted to come into this industry to just share what knowledge I'd learned along the way, because starting an industry in New Zealand basically was, it'd never been done before. So, we had years of trial and error and stuff like that to get us to where we were, and so the industry needed that sort of support. So I approached Panapa back, I think it was like 2015, sort of snuck in undercover as a observer of his first hemp harvest that he was doing with a local polytech or education provider. And from there, slowly exposed myself to him about my passion of wanting to help. And really it's come to a point of wanting to help our people that have come from an area hounded by cannabis prohibition for decades, and that's through aerial eradication. So that's a little bit about me.
So you've seen some things. Well, I'm keen to there's a few leads there that I'll be seeking to pick up on over the course of this chat. But maybe Panapa, if I can throw to you, I'm really keen to hear the story of how you founded Rua, what the company's philosophy is all about, and what the journey's been like so far for you.
Yeah, I think when we first started, we weren't actually looking at cannabis, and as Porou said, we come from the the easternmost part of the North Island of Aotearoa of New Zealand, and it's really rural, and there aren't a huge amount of opportunities there. And we were really looking at ways where we could develop industries or sustainable economic development that were good for the land and for the people. Because most of the stuff that where we're from, it was high volume, low value stuff like forestry and hard hooved animals and a little bit of grain. And that was like our land would get used to grow something that was low value, get shipped off, and that's all the benefit we were seeing. And where we're from geographically, the land's really unstable. So most of our land had been cleared and tried to turn into farming when it never should have done that. So we were looking at alternative ways where we could use native plants to recloak our whenua, recloak our land so that they'd be in a better health. And we looked at a whole lot of native stuff, and we've got a number of projects that are still going with it. But what we really wanted to do was create opportunity to increase the household income, because if you've got a higher household income, then you've got a better well-being amongst your whānau, and our incomes back home are, compared to the rest of New Zealand, are quite low. There were a few reasons for getting into cannabis. One was that we've got heaps of our families had grown cannabis for years, for decades. Our region's known as one of the cannabis-rich regions where a lot of good cannabis was grown. So we had the legacy of our uncles, aunties, etc., growing for decades, and they developed a name as very good growers. So we knew that we had the skill, and this was a time in the world when the green rush was going on, global green rush. That was, and we knew that if we didn't jump in as Indigenous Māori, then we'd miss out, and it would just be essentially a rich white man that would come through and play the dominant game that they did, or that they do. So for us, there was a whole lot of justice stuff in there, as well as creating jobs. So the stats around the whole globe is that if you're Indigenous and you get caught with weed, you're 4 times more likely to go to jail, and you're 4 times more likely to be charged. So for us at home, we're 95% Māori, is that we had as a people had worn the brunt of prohibition for decades, and that's had a big toll on our people, like our uncles, our nephews, our brothers, our cousins. They were the ones that they might get caught growing, a harmless plant, but then their charges would get ramped up to possession of firearms, to resisting arrest. And so we wanted to turn that tide. And what we do know is that if you're not if you're not in the game, then you're out of the game. So we jumped in. We really wanted to be part of making sure that we weren't left behind. And so that's really what drove us to do it. And so when we started, there was no regulations, there was no legislation in Aotearoa, and we could see the global green rush going on. And the only way, as Porou said, the only way that we could grow legally was to grow hemp. And so we started with an outdoor hemp harvest, and that was really when we were looking at the market, because there's only really medicinal, food, and fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So we chucked some hemp seeds in the ground, and over that first season, we did our research and identified that the medicinal space was the only way that we were going to be able to get in. And that's kind of I think our first crop was 2016,
Wow.
which was a bit of a buzz, growing weed out in the open, not hiding, apart from hiding it from our own locals. But yeah, having a license to be able to grow, that was really the start of a long journey that we've been on.
So
Yeah.
you guys now like the sort of celebrities. I was just looking up Rua's in Gisborne on the is that where it is in New Zealand? Sort of.
Yeah, so Rua Bioscience is about 2 hours north of that. It's the easternmost settlement in New Zealand.
Amazing. You got like, it's such a great story to have been able to take the community with you almost on this journey. As you said, I mean, I'm remembering back to when the first New Zealand companies came onto the scene, and I just recall it was a bit of a crazy rush, similarly to what happened in Australia. A lot of listed companies, although I did see you guys are listed as well, right? Is that? Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, and then there was the referendum that we read about. Have you got a question on that, Mitch?
Well, I was actually going to lead into it by saying that I'm curious to know how the, I guess the Indigenous population, call it relates to cannabis? Is it different to, say, let's say the white population as an example? Or do you think Australia versus New Zealand, is it, would you say there's a bigger uptake in New Zealand or a bigger uptake in Australia? I'm trying to get a kind of gauge on the public's kind of perception of cannabis, because that referendum the other year was so close, and it kind of, I heard there was a bit of Christian lobbying on that one, and a few different things that came into play. I'm trying to get an understanding of how the people on the ground feel about cannabis by and large, not just in a medicinal space.
Yeah, I think for the listeners, when we had our referendum a few years ago, the legalized missed out by half a percent. It was that close. If that referendum was done now, you'd see it fly through, just because so much education has happened in that time. Like, and Porou may want to talk to this, just the change that's happened within our community, just because what we've done has been massive. So as stuff becomes more accessible, and all those people that got driven into their heads that weed was bad, and now they're seeing the benefits of it, and their friends are, typically older European backgrounds. One friend will get it, and they're like, "Oh, I'm off my 42 pills. Like, life's so much better," all that kind of stuff. And that was really deep for our people too. Like, a lot of our older generation, all our aunties and all our nannies, they were all like hate against cannabis, and now they've had the benefit of it. And as we all know, as those that partake or around people that do, the amount of relief that comes from the plant. So there's been a huge shift, and that increase is just kind of happening more over time.
And is that being reflected, do you think, in the uptake from the medicinal market?
There's definitely, well, from a legal medicinal market.
Sometimes on this podcast, we talk about the blurring between the medicinal and the recreational space, and trying to be a bit, honest about what occurs. Not that they're mutually exclusive, and not.
And then there's well-being in the middle of that. So, like, proactively looking after your health, but maybe not using it medically reactively to treat something.
There's definitely been a larger uptake. More people are trying it that wouldn't have tried it because of that shift that's happening. So just because it's being more accepted, then there are more people. But I think we're seeing this, like, there's always early adopters into all sorts of things. So I think as it matures, and I'm saying same as in Australia, all the stats say that more people are coming on. So yeah, we're definitely in the beginning of our growth stage.
That's amazing. And you guys are working with talk to me about the genetics that Rua is working with, because I heard something interesting just before we started recording, that they're local genetics, or what's the situation there?
So one of the great things about the medicinal cannabis scheme in New Zealand is the illicit declaration, where we are able to source the genetics that are out there in the communities, the ones that have been out there for years, or the genetics that have really adapted to the different microclimates that New Zealand have. They've been able to come into the legal scheme, and we're able to use those. So what's been happening is, with some of the tests and that, is that there's a lot of local genetics that are coming in with large amounts of minor cannabinoids and stuff like that. So I guess the idea when this scheme started was that, in the hope that the medicine is out there. We can't be naive and say that every strain or every genetic of cannabis is healing. So the ones that really have the combinations of different cannabinoids could be out there in the community. And a lot of the genetics that have sort of been in New Zealand or circulate in New Zealand, we've had a wide variety that were, more or less brought in back in the 1800s when the British settlers first came to New Zealand. They bought some, and then over the years, different people came to New Zealand with different strains of cannabis that were for medicinal and recreational use. So one of the most famous nuns was Mary Joseph Obeah. And you know, in about the 1890s, she was making, her and her group were making cannabis medicines and selling it up these real isolated rivers of New Zealand that were predominantly Māori, marae, or parasites. And through there, a lot of that history of where the genetics have come from, and that has been obscured through prohibition. So it scares people off knowing where the history of all this stuff comes. But like over the last 30 years, what I've seen is there was the Asian genetics that were coming in, so the chocolate Thais, the um, Thai sticks, Buddha sticks, stuff like that, and seed was coming from that. And then we saw influx of different genetics that were coming in through groups that were visiting places like Amsterdam and North America, coming back with the skunks and the Afghanis and stuff like that. And I guess New Zealand, with all its different microclimates, these genetics have been able to adapt to our growing conditions and also being crossed. So there would have been earlier breeding where people were breeding um, their imported or this newer genetic with the old school ones to sort of create something different. So I guess in a way it's easier for us to find what we're looking for if we know the history of what we're looking for, what was around. And I guess a lot of people carry that IP or experience of what was good back in the day and what it was sort of doing for people, whether it was uplifting and or whether it was something that helped people with certain ailments. So a lot of those genetics, we're lucky to source local genetics that have been around. We've had a guy come in recently that shared genetics that originated from master breeders, you know, such as Shanti Barbara and stuff like that from back in those days, 30 odd years ago, that are still floating around here. And then we have what is referred to as land race genetics that people claim are still available in New Zealand. So that's the luxury of being able to play with all this local genetics if you're able to procure them and knowing what you're getting is what it is, you know, not just someone's word of mouth that this is we call it like Coromandel Gold or Tapuki Thunder. We can't go off a word of mouth. We really have to know the people that know the people that know the people. And I guess walking that fine line where I came from, illicit or legacy, is able to still talk with those people to see who's got what. You know, where are these strains that Mother Obeah had when she came to New Zealand, and genetics like hers are still available up that river. You know, like, so it's like you imagine strain hunters coming to New Zealand, they could have a field ball if they knew where to go, and that information is readily available and no one's doing it yet. So hoping to make connections like that to see if we can secure genetics that came from her time and see what sort of medicinal healing properties they had.
Amazing. Goodness me. That whole history of, yeah, cannabis seed movement for the last few hundred years in New Zealand is, yeah, there would be some unique stuff over there. We've seen, every time I read about a farm in New Zealand, there's always just most picturesque farms you've ever seen. Like, just, and the quality of the flower just looks unbelievable. Are you guys, you know, I know it's a trial and error process, and you've been going now since 2016. Are you now, sort of, now that we're in 2024, are you feeling like you've nailed it? You're getting really consistent, stabilized genetics, a really consistent product each and every time, or is it still, you know, still learning something new every few months?
I think it's a mixture of everything. Like, for instance, like, we've only been doing the breeding genetic stuff probably like full scale into it probably for the last, feels like 2 years. And you know, no one can really say that they're cracking it in that time. There's a lot of trials that you have to do. There's a lot of trials that I want to do, and it's trying to weigh up what we can do in this time and what we've got. So it's always going to be an ongoing process before you can say that you're delivering something that's this,
Yeah.
but in the meantime, we can do always keep trialing of different seed that we're doing, looking for different phenos. And at the moment, we're strictly focusing on pheno hunting. And when we get towards summer, I'm hoping to do some summer outdoor growing to see what our stability is like then. So we're really, I'd say we're still in the early stages of it, but it's a learning thing for the company for wanting to take this direction. I mean, no one had the book on how to do it. We don't have the Shanti Barbers here and all that sort of thing, but we can still talk to those guys and learn. And I guess it's really going back to those guys that hold those foundations to acknowledge them for what they've done, because basically every genetic that's out there comes back to these guys that played with it. And we're just humbled to be able to do what we do, be able to do what we do with the facility that we have, and keep learning. So it's always about learning,
I
and
never
hopefully, yeah, with the right guidance, we'll get to where we can pat ourselves on the back one day and say, look, yeah, we really did it. We're happy with what we're getting now, but it's a 2 to 5 year, even more sort of thing, and we're hoping that we can still carry on doing that and learning and just doing things a lot better.
Yeah.
I think that the thing for us is that we're not growing for supply. Is that we outsource all our growing for supply, so our crew get to just focus on that. And there's not many, definitely not in New Zealand, and very few really globally, that just get to focus on pheno hunting and doing genetics. And so that's our strategy. That's one of the core centers of our strategy. So the pressures of doing those commercial crops and getting consistent kgs that are called pounds that are coming out week after week after week, that kind of gets released for these guys to really like practice, focus on the art form of what they're doing. So for some of our other competitors, they can only do that much because they've got to do that much production. We're the other way around now, and it's taken us a while to get to that space, but our strategy has always been stay agile, because it's such a fast moving market. We're only just seeing the Australasian, let alone the global market, starting to mature.
Yeah.
We've stayed agile enough to still be here. Where there's as same in Australia, there's companies that are falling off all the time because their strategies have been too rigid and they haven't been able to adapt. So yeah.
Well, it's exciting, because I'm thinking as well, like, does that mean you are to some extent operating a bit of a nursery situation where you can, license, if you do some great pheno hunting, do you work collaboratively with other, commercial scale growers? And so you guys perfect, the genetics and then give clones or something, and somebody else can take care of that commercial production.
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So what it also does is that it de-risks that. If you've got one facility and you see all the big crews that have had like multi-million-dollar blowouts because they've lost their whole crop because of something.
Yeah.
But it de-risks that if we've got multiple growers all around the place, whether it's in New Zealand or in Australia or in our European markets or overseas markets that we're focused on, then it's definitely a collaborative rather than we're the be all and end all. Like when we started, we had to be fully vertical integrated because there was nobody else around. But we've definitely honed in on where our skill sets are and where we want to play in the market, and we're definitely up for collaboration.
Nice. And so I suppose I'm keen to, just because our audience largely is based in Australia, and we've got a mixture of patients, people in the industry, a whole lot of people that will be listening to this. But what can you inform the Australians about what it's like in the industry over in New Zealand? Can you give us the good and the bad? Like, are you finding you know, the same issues that Australian companies are sometimes running into, where they might have overextended or, you know, taken a lot of investment. I'm sure that those sort of narratives are playing out over there as well. But yeah, what can you tell us about the scene over there?
I think probably one of the big things is that when our regulations got set up, they didn't get set up very well for companies doing business. So it's really hard for cannabis companies to run viable businesses here. There's been a few changes, but it was more done from a patient-centric space rather than patient and business. So it's cheaper to get cannabis from overseas into New Zealand patients than it is for New Zealand companies to grow it for ourselves, for our own people.
That sounds like Australia.
Yeah, and so it kind of mirrors a lot of places in the globe. So, you know, at the start there was a lot of fever, a lot of investment went into handfuls of companies, probably not to the same extent as Australia with the numbers. But just as you said, there's companies that are, there's 3 NZX listed companies. One's, you know, they've just been placed into, over the last few months, into voluntary liquidation. So there's been a number or a handful of other kind of early movers that have dropped out of the scene. And then you've got the ones that have waited to, you know, wait for the market conditions to be right. And there's a handful of us that have been agile enough or had enough backing to be able to get through. And for us, we're intergenerational. The reason why we set up the company was for intergenerational benefits. So we're always looking long term. It's not so much about pump and dump and quick profits. So we definitely have an underpinning of how we're here, so there's intergenerational benefit. But maybe Pro wants to talk about some of the in-market stuff and that we're kind of seeing and experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know that the genetic side was actually the easiest, best thing about New Zealand recently that in the recent years. I must say that everything else I've heard from the market and getting into market is actually quite difficult, especially maybe not as much, and I'm not sure on this for domestic cultivators, but definitely for people bringing product in. So whereas you have a pretty developed market in Australia of quite a range of different things reflected on the market, it's quite prohibitive to get into the New Zealand market because of all the regulations. From my understanding, it's testing batches and all the rest. It's extremely financially burdensome to do anything in New Zealand. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what kind of how that affects what New Zealanders actually have access to.
Yeah, I mean, you put the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head. Like, all of those make it really challenging to run a profitable business here. And so what we saw was a whole lot of stuff being just imported in, and there's only a handful of companies really doing that well as well. And Australia is one of our focus markets, and so we've been, for the last couple of years, been really focused in that space, developing our pipeline into Australia. And one of the things that we have been finding as we trying to get onto formularies and all those kind of things through the market to be able to bring New Zealand cannabis into the Australian market is the desire for crews in Australia who want to come into New Zealand, but they're just like, can you help us with that? So the areas in our strategy, we've got the genetics, and the other side is regulatory expertise and putting stuff into market. So those are our two posts that we really focus on. So in our team, we've got arguably one of the most, or the most experienced lady in cannabis from a regulatory perspective. She's amazing. What she doesn't know in the regulatory space isn't kind of worth knowing. And we've got an amazing team who've been over the last 6 years really focusing on that. So we've got a huge amount of knowledge in that space. But yeah, it definitely hasn't been easy, but that kind of has provided us with a knowledge and experience that we can then leverage. Compared to other places in the world, it's relatively and again, Pro, you might want to jump in here. It's relative. There isn't a huge lot of selection, and the quality. When we're not seeing the quality that could be available for our people, like, and you guys will see it. People all around the world will see it when you open up a bottle and it's like looking at dead weed. Like, the ability to have really high quality, fresh, that that the life of those flowers to be preserved in a way that can get the maximum benefit for the patients and for our customers. Like, we're yet to really see that come into fruition.
Yeah, like Carnival said, the stuff imported, it's creating a false anxiety amongst the people that this is the norm for the cannabis industry, and yet the quality of it is quite mediocre. It's old. There's no smell. People are telling me they're grinding it up, and there's no crystals in their fine sieve and stuff like that. And I guess it's like, why are we allowing this to continue and not put our best foot forward, showing the industry or the people that you can grow a plant to the peak of perfection to get the best quality out of it? And a lot of people say, oh, does quality mean high THC? And it's not. It's about harvesting that plant at the right time, curing it, so that when people are experiencing that, whether it's in a dry flower, if it's been manufactured, the plant's just at its best ability to give what it gives, not some dead rubbish. So, I always say that the weed is mediocre. I see it, I look at it, I cringe, and it reminds me of the black market. The black market right now, a lot of, a few years back, I think from the 90s onwards, a lot of our good boutique cannabis growers all went underground because of methamphetamine. The methamphetamine epidemic in New Zealand caused a lot of people to go out narking to police about where grows were, who had tinny shops, stuff like that. So a lot of the good growers pulled themselves out of the black market and just worked with their own little syndicates or circles where they would circulate their good cannabis, and it opened up the spot for opportunists in the black market who just put out crap weed. Now, the only thing I like about this imported cannabis is that even though I call it mediocre, it's better than some of the quality that's in the black market. And my hope is that the pressure of this medicinal market would put the pressure on the black market to up your game, cut these opportunists out and grow decent cannabis for our people. And that's where it's all at. If people were growing good cannabis, and that's big companies too, then the cannabis will be more welcome and accepted by patients, rather than being dictated that this, I'm not even going to say a name, but this imported product, if it's supposed to be good for you or not. And I think we're really kidding ourselves in New Zealand to allow this type of mediocre cannabis to come in and be available for patients. But we're a country where the regulations were to make easier access for the patient, not, it wasn't suited for us to grow good cannabis for our people. So we're stuck in a bind. And if we do grow good cannabis in New Zealand, it's got to go to Oz, and then it's got to come back to New Zealand, trumping up the price of it and also degrading along the way.
Yeah.
So it's a hard game to play, and people.
Sorry, does it go to Oz for irradiation? Is that the reason why it gets sent over? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So there's an opening for
can,
someone in New Zealand. You've got to set up an irradiation facility.
Oh yeah, just pull out, an extra $150 million to set up. No problem.
Totally.
Yeah, sadly, that's the truth. Is it's all about who's got the money to do that.
Yeah.
And it could entice someone too, or we need to look at other ways of cleaning the product without going through the irradiation product. I mean, I think of back in the day when they used to have this cannabis, and if it wasn't dried properly when they stored it, it would come out of their buckets. And this is at Christmas time when there's low supply but huge demand. and it used to smell like ammonia. You know, we call it mimmy weed or piss weed because that's what it was. It smelled like that, and people were dictated to have that.
Yeah.
And so we look at, was that beneficial for the people? It probably would never be beneficial for a patient, but people were smoking that crap for decades, and I don't see people dead from it.
Yeah.
So maybe our microbial thing that we're looking at with cleaning cannabis is way too high a spec, and that there must be another way that we can clean up cannabis or grow it to a point where there's no microbials to get it to our people. But the only other way to get it into the scheme is calling it a tea, you know, cooking it as having it as a tea and drinking it.
Interesting.
So
Making
yeah.
vapes. Could always make some vapes.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it is interesting. I mean, you know, when we think of, not that we shouldn't have quality stipulations in there, but I do often think that, you know, we have these quality markers in Australia's TGO 93 and 100 that definitely wasn't around for the last 10 millennia that we've been, you know, consuming this plant. In saying that, we didn't use the types of pesticides and things that we use now back then either. So like there's two sides to that coin, but
Yeah, I think the microbial limits in Australia, though, are particularly strict by global standards. And I'm not sure what the case is in New Zealand, but in Australia, it's just impossible to even contemplate supplying flour that hasn't been irradiated. It just wouldn't pass that TGO 100. But yeah, it sounds like the government has made it hard for you guys, but here you are still kicking, going from strength to strength. And, you know, you've kind of navigated all that. And now you're in a really, really strong position after just laboring through all of that. So it's a huge, huge credit to you guys. What is the future sort of looking like for Rua? As you say, it's sort of, you're not here for, you know, a short time. You're here to, you know, to carry forward to future generations. Do you have actually, I'm just kind of interested in that piece you raised before, Panapa, around community and the social aspect of the company. Do you have support from, you know, local government in the area that you're operating in? And you know, might there be a possibility of, you know, getting assistance from the government if they see the good work that you're doing to expand the facility? Like, what does the future hold for you guys?
I think we've got to get you off the old mute there, mate.
I think one of the things that we kind of, well, I don't know, as a founder, I'm really, and we do a whole lot of things, and it's not just cannabis. So I'm involved with a whole lot of things, and one of the things is, like, if you rely on government for anything, it's a really dangerous space to be in. Like, we've just had a change of government. Every time there's a change of government, programs go out the door, they come in the door, and so you know, we've always been open to help guide and provide assistance to the government to create better schemes and things like that. Like, there was a whole lot of things that would have been way worse for the industry if we hadn't been part of the establishment of the industry. Now, the government didn't get it perfect, and we got a handful of things across the line, but you know, as far as you know, support, I think one of the things that we hold on to, and one of the things we really were focused on when we first started, was we want to create pathways for our families and people that live in our community to be able to grow, so that you can grow legally. At the moment, the barriers to entry are still way too high. But, you know, like most places, like Australia will be the same, New Zealand will be the same. Like, it's not if, but it's when you have an adult market that opens up, instead of it having to go through the medicinal space. So for us, we're definitely going to be around long enough to be able to help help that market come into fruition in New Zealand, and be able to help guide with all the knowledge that we've and experience that we've got through the years that we've been doing this, and we've still got to go before that happens, to be able to help others to come in. So it's the New Zealand Inc. cannabis growers. It's not we don't want to be a silo by ourselves and be the best, the biggest. Like we said before, like collaboration is a big thing. Like if everybody's winning and everybody's coming up, then it's much better rather than I don't know, the extractive capitalist market of I must win, I must get the most. It's all about me. Well,
Yeah.
and so and because of that, that story's always been there. Like we're generally pretty well supported, and we've had some tough goings too. Like when we first started, we didn't have anything to base anything on. So we had a crowdfunding was the way that we started. We wanted to give our people the first opportunity to get in. It's part of our social license, our social background. And what we were projected, what we thought were going to happen, took way longer, and so we haven't been able to deliver a whole of the outcomes that we thought that we could see. But the biggest thing for us is that we're still here, and we keep going. Like, and that means that we've had to do some things that we didn't necessarily see at the start that are all community focused. So we have a really big program for our rangatahi, for our youth, where we give them scholarships, we take them away on job experience, and we get to take them to our research institutes and our universities and to a whole lot of our partners, like our suppliers, our testing things, so they get to see a world that they would never have seen. And then we've also got a compassionate access program. So we have, in our region where we're based, we have 30 patients, or it might be more than that now, maybe it's closer to 40, that we pay for their medicine every month. And that's one of the big things that we're pushing out around the world. So we've just started with our first compassionate access offerings in Australia. And then we've got 3 patients that are being guided into that through one of our partners. And so that's really about giving back. It's not you can get a 50% discount or a 30% discount. It's like in a region where we're from, there's a number of our whānau who can't afford, or our families that can't afford prescription medicines because it's not subsidized here. So that's our commitment, and that's our long-term commitment. And we've got a goal of like to go from 30, what we started with, up to 300 patients. And so if we're getting to that and we're able to supply that, then we know that people are getting the medicine that we need. So, and that comes out of our profits. That doesn't come from any government support or anything like that. The government support is just too far down the track. You've got to have phase 3 medical trials to get before the government's starting to like subsidize stuff. So no mind waiting for the government. We're just in there doing what we can as we can.
That's brilliant. I love the story and love what you guys are doing. It's and I think it's given us a bit of an insight as well, and our audience, hopefully. It's just to some of the challenges, but also opportunities that exist in New Zealand in the cannabis scene. And honestly, it was really interesting what you were saying before about if they were to have another referendum again. It sounds like the public tide has really turned in favor of it. So I'm sure that actually, just out of interest, that new prime minister you've got, the Conservative one, is he pretty anti-cannabis? Or is he, or is he one of these politicians who says, oh, I once had a little bit of cannabis when I was younger, but, I haven't had it in 30 years. We hear that line.
You know what politicians like? They're all kind of the same. That even if it's good or if it's bad, they're playing to what ensures they get the most votes when they need it in their cycles. So
yeah, exactly.
Like politicians are politicians.
Yeah,
there's handfuls of good ones. There's just not enough of them.
Yeah.
They're a bunch of silly politicians at the moment because they're screaming out that our country needs all this money, and look what can come out of it if you had a decent cannabis industry pumping in New Zealand right now. I mean, we need money to help everything, right down to drug and alcohol rehabilitation, mental health. They're all struggling. Our health systems are struggling here where we come from, and yet they're suppressing us from, using this plant to uplift our whole communities, uplift our country.
Yeah, it's all good. Just send some more dairy to China. That'll fix everything, obviously. Anyway, no, very good, gents. Well, beautiful. Thanks so much for the chat, Panapa and Porou. Really appreciate your time, and we'll if we're over in New Zealand, we should get over there at some point, Mitch. We've been talking about that for a little while.
I'll probably be doing a little trip later next year, actually.
Yes. Yes.
On the way through.
Yeah,
the
that's
island.
to Tonga.
Yeah.
Yeah, goodness me.
You guys,
If you guys end up coming over, we'll turn it on for you. We'll take you down to our local beach, light a bonfire, let loose. Enjoyable. We took Jeremy Plum there. He loved it.
That
We'll
sounds
just
incredible.
roast you
Would
true
love
East
to.
Coast style.
That
Love
actually sounds amazing. As long as we get John Sanders down there as well. Shout out to John. I'm sure he's listening. Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks, gents. Have a lovely evening and appreciate the chat. Wish you guys all the best.
yeah, likewise. Thank you, guys.
No worries.
Cheers.
Cheers.